Bleeding brakes, and I do mean that in the vernacular, as we shall see. Back in part 16, I converted the brakes back to the original Guzzi link system, as the previous owner had converted it to the more traditional separated front and rear brakes. However, it may not be as simple as I first thought, so we may need to come back to that. I'll start at the front. With the master on the handlebar connected directly to just the front right caliper, this should be fairly quick and easy. First, I check that all the connections are tight, including the hose to banjo fittings at both ends. As DOT4 brake fluid doubles up as a good paint stripper, I do add some rags to contain any spillage. My preferred method for filling the system is to push the fluid back up from the caliper bleed nipple using a large syringe, which is what I'm doing now. But when it comes to bleeding the brakes, I struggle to get any back pressure, and on closer inspection I notice that the fluid is leaking past the bottom crush washer on the banjo, just here, although it's not visible on the video. I do try nipping the banjo down a bit tighter, but to no avail. I also notice that the action on the lever doesn't feel particularly good, although that won't come across in the video. So as I'm going to have to take the caliper off to deal with the leaking fluid, I'll also have another look at the master. Right, so how I didn't notice this when I rebuilt and refitted the caliper, I don't know. But the issue with the leaking banjo is clearly being caused by the extensive pitting around the ports, and the extent of that pitting is likely being exacerbated by the ceramic coating. On this caliper, the left port is for the hose and the right is for the bleed nipple. I did wonder how this was not an issue on the bike before I stripped it down all those years ago, but looking at the old hoses we can see that the connection into the caliper was different, so not relying on the condition of the surface around the port. I could revert back to this style of fitting, but decide instead to clean up the area around the ports, not least as it involves a bit of real engineering. With a suitable lash-up on my milling machine table, I clamp one side of the caliper to an angle plate and use a dial gauge to set it level. Using an edge finder, I position the port directly below the quill and use a 14mm slot drill to clean up the surface, cutting through both the ceramic coating and into the body of the caliper to get below the pitting. The crush washers I'm using have an OD of just under 14mm, so fit nicely into the freshly cut recess. I do the same for the bleed nipple port on the other side of the caliper, which gives me the option to use either in the future. I'm not going to go through the reassembly of the caliper, as I covered this off in part 15. But it is probably worth making a few call-outs. The piston seal rings are trapezoidal in profile, well, to my eyes at least, and when refitting should have the larger diameter facing into the caliper body towards the closed end of the cylinder. This should be detectable when fitted by feeling the edge of the seal when sliding a finger over it from the closed to the open end of the cylinder. Secondly, when I previously bolted the two sides of the caliper body together, I didn't have a washer to fit on the bolt that fits in the recessed hole. So this time around I turned down some larger diameter washers to fit. Also this time around I add some copper slip to the back of the pads and the pad retaining pins. Another miss on my part when I previously fitted the calipers were these washers that sit between the calipers and the mounting brackets on the forks. They are only half mil thick, but they are required to align the calipers correctly to the discs. When I rebuilt the front master back in part 15, I reused the rebuild kit that I previously fitted in 2017. So rather than faff around with it now, I just buy a new one and fit it. Whilst we're on the front master, there are a couple of other things I need to cover off. I believe that the original would have been a PS12 model, whereas mine appears to be a PS15. From what I can determine, the 12 was likely swapped out for the 15 when the brakes were converted, which is necessary due to the increased volume of brake fluid required for two rather than one caliper. How the larger master will work with a single caliper, I guess I'll soon be finding out, but for now I'll assume that it will likely be overly sensitive and powerful. That the master has at some time been swapped out might also explain why the lever is incorrect, but more annoyingly why there is no wing mirror mount. When I got the bike, the right mirror was mounted via this awful bracket that clamped over the brake reservoir. I'm sure I can make something a lot better than that. Fingers crossed, my machining of the calipers will address the leaky banjo issue, and I should now be able to progress with bleeding the brakes. I have made the same modification to the front left caliper, but there's no need for the rear, as that doesn't use banjo connections. With everything back on the bike and nipped up tight, I have another go at getting the fluid into the front brake system and bled. Once the system is full, I remove the syringe and drop the hose into a pot of brake fluid and bleed the system through. This time with no leaks at the banjo and quickly getting some good back pressure on the lever. I can now refit the diaphragm and the lid to the reservoir. To set the lever position, I need to first find and then fit the adjuster cam. After digging through my old parts, I managed to locate the cam, which is not looking too special. After an overnight soak in white vinegar, it is looking a lot better, so will be fine to be reused. I have taken the dimensions should I ever want to make a new one from stainless. What I assumed was a head socket on one end appears not to be, or if it was, it has long since rounded off. So I first add a nylock nut before giving the cam a good coating of grease and then fitting it onto the lever assembly. I've removed the lever to do so, which isn't actually necessary, but I had a few issues with the first fit. Before refitting the lever, I also give that a good coating with grease. I don't show it in the video, but after this initial go, I have to remove and refit the cam a few times to adjust the nut to position the cam to give the maximum lever travel. I need to do this off the bike, as there's no way to hold the cam to move the nut when it's fitted. To change the lever position, there is a small grub screw here that can be used to bring the lever closer to the bar if needed. I do still need to tackle the link system, and given the challenges encountered with the front brake, I can't imagine that will be easy. Still, it's all good fun, and that's really the last obstacle to having a functioning motorbike. Thanks for watching.